What happens to a civilization after it abandons the moral framework that built it? Can America remain America if its understanding of truth, freedom, family, faith, and even human dignity fundamentally changes? Over the last decade, Western culture has experienced enormous shifts in immigration, in religion, education, politics, and public morality. But are these simply today's political trends or signs of a much deeper civilizational transformation? Well, hi everyone. Welcome again. I'm Lenny Esposito, and today I'll be joined by international apologist and cultural analyst Dr. Jacob Daniel, where we take a deep dive into the abandonment of the Christian presuppositions that provided the foundation of our nation. We start to ask where society's shifting assumptions may likely take us in 10 years, and it leads to discuss a provocative question. Will we even recognize America in 2035? So stay tuned. That's all coming up on this Come Let Us Reason Together. Well, good day, everyone. Welcome again to another Come Let Us Reason broadcast. I am excited to be here today with my good friend, Dr. Jacob Daniel. Many of you who've been following the podcast for some time know Dr. Daniel. We've worked together on the apologetics.com radio show many times, and we've had him on the show here as well. For those who don't know, Dr. Daniel he received his pre-doctoral degree in India and did his advanced studies in international development at the University of Manchester in the UK, where he also attended the University of Oxford to study theology. Jacob has a PhD in intercultural studies from Biola University, and in the past 15 years he's traveled and lived in different parts of the world, advocating for a global alliance and defending human dignity. He's currently an international apologist, speaker, and cultural analyst, as also the founder of Heritage Council and a fellow at the Kirkwood Center, of which I'm a part as well. So, Jacob, first of all, welcome. Glad to have you with me again. We used to do this, definitely monthly for many, many years as we would drive in the middle of the night to a studio in Glendale. But now we get to kind of do it directly, which is great to be able to have. So,
Lenny, what a joy to be back again. Yeah, I miss those days when we would go to do midnight show on the KKLA radio. And yeah, I miss those days. And so this is so good to be back again.
Well, it is good to be back and always have a good time. We always enjoy talking with one another, spurring each other in thoughts, analyzing culture, as we say, seeing how things have changed. It's interesting that because of your background, because you grew up as kind of I'm going to say a double minority. So when in your native India, you grew up in a Christian household, a Christian family that goes back 3 or 4 generations at least. And that makes you a minority within the context of the larger Indian culture. And then, of course, you come to the West to study, to grow, and that makes you a minority in the Western culture as well. So you have kind of one foot in both aspects of how culture is perceived, how the West is structured. You have a Christian concept, a Christian worldview, but at the same time, you have a very familiar understanding of kind of an Eastern view of the world, because that's the
broader context,
in which you were raised, the feel of the nation and things of that.
There is another layer to that, and I also I was born and raised up north in India, while my heritage is from the south.
Oh, interesting.
So there've been that layer as well, where I've seen the outworking of Christian framework at some level in the south.
Okay.
In conflict with the northern.
Yeah, northern is a little bit more strict.
Things have been different, yes.
And matter of fact, there have been there have been some persecutions, and in the Northwest, then you get the Pakistan and the yes. Muslim contingent also. So it's a fascinating study, and it's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about today, because you made an interesting post in social media. You basically said that from your perspective, the United States that you visited when you first came here, now that's let's say 14 years ago, 15 years ago, is radically different than the one that we're seeing today. And more concerningly, it's changing in such a way that in 10 years, it's going to be even more radically different. So I want to back up a little bit, because I would say that when we look culturally at some of the context here, a lot of sociologists, a lot of cultural commentators will point to maybe a 2010, definitely sometime during the Obama administration, where we started to see a radical change in just the general perception that people had. You had the rise of course, intersectionality, right? Critical theory, diversity, equity, inclusion. All of those things start to come to the fore in the teen years of the 21st century, culminating in the 2020 riots that happened over the summer, things of that nature. But there was a broader context. We had Obergefell. We had just a number of shifts in the way that people understood life. And at the same time, family life really started to be put on the back burner. There are, you start to see people marrying later, having fewer children. Of course, there's a lot of discussion going on right now about how most Western societies are in a fertility freefall. They're just not reproducing themselves. Even India, fascinatingly, is finding itself, and you wouldn't think, when India surpassed China as the largest population center on Earth, you were thinking that, wow, what's going to happen next? But even in India, we're starting to see this trend of reversal of population growth. And I think we'll talk about that some. But here's the interesting thing. In these 20 points that you list, and we'll go through them, I see them, you talked about 4 kind of primary overarching subjects. One was of lifestyle and family. One was of education and development in the corporate world. One was of changes to politics and immigration, especially in the U.S. And of course, that's a huge issue right now. And then lastly, issues of religion and faith. Now, these are specifically, as I understand your comments, these are how you're understanding where America used to be, where it is now, and where it's going. So what we're doing is we're kind of taking a crystal ball and saying, if these trends continue in 10 years, there's going to be these kinds of outcomes, and those kinds of outcomes have significant effects to them. Is that the best way I can frame it?
Yeah, correct. And I think I would see more on the reverse order as I understand culture and nations. Every society is the outworking of our worldview, an ideological framework that we adopt. And I think what's happening right now, as an Easterner, when I see much of what I'm seeing is 2 competing civilizational ecosystems developing here. And particularly, as you mentioned, it's also because of the impact of globalization, impact of internet. People have more access to other cultures in terms of not just interacting with people, but also ideas that they are hearing and seeing the outwork of that in other cultures as well. And then definitely with the immigration of people coming in and bringing in their cultures and worldviews, and how much of that is having impact. So I think in our discussion today, even when we're analyzing these changes or shift that has happened, what is necessary for us to, as a premise for our discussion is the major shift in the framework on which the Western world, particularly American idea of republic, was built upon, and the idea of nation adopted by other cultures, and how that is not available within their own framework to maintain and justify. So the conflict is one, I would say, though much of our discussion today here in the Western world is about the whole idea of nationalism. Wherever you turn these days, everyone's talking about that. My proposal is that when it comes to ideas and these nations that we look at and cultures we look at, they see it from the perspective of civilization, not as much as nation. Because
Right.
civilizational ideas are not confined by geographical boundaries, which are new construct, as they would say it.
And that's true. Yeah.
Nations are defined by boundaries. That's why
Right.
you have to talk about immigration and talk about preserving the identity of a people group that is confined within that geographical boundary. So I know we have limited time. We can do a full series on these. But I just want to highlight a few things where our audience would know the shift is happening. They would know this because we are in a generation, as you said, these
Well,
changes.
yeah. Why don't you tell me a little bit? First of all, I'm kind of curious.
Yeah.
When you first got here, even though I mean, obviously there was television American shows that were broadcast in India, and you had because you grew up in a Christian family, you kind of had a Christian ethos that you grew up. But when you actually got to the West, what was there a significant culture shift for you? What was it that you said you go, oh, I wouldn't have even thought this way? I mean, what took you by surprise initially?
So I could see when I started traveling, which was in 2004, it's been over 20 years because I lived in different countries. Lived in the Gulf countries for some time, in Europe. I've traveled to Africa, Southeast Asia, traveled quite a bit, interacted with a lot of people. So one of the major things I saw, having lived in the UK for some time before coming to the United States, so I had a preview of what could happen if you let these ideas work
Yeah.
out. So that was an important factor to me coming to the West as a missionary, as I always say, to engage with the churches here. So one of the major things I could see was that there was this adoption of the idea of multiculturalism, for example, without any questioning as to what could be the outcome of this. On the premise that all cultures and worldviews are on the same level when it comes to their outworking. So it doesn't matter what culture you come from or what worldview, religious worldview you hold to, at the end of the day, it would lead you to the same end, which is good. That was the premise. And I could see when I landed in the Western world, there was a complete contrast between the world that I came from, which was very much low trust based society, than a high trust society. In the UK and European nations, you could leave things outside, or you could just leave your doors open, or you could travel without any concern in terms of you may have to manage with languages or misunderstanding because of that and things like that. You could do that. But then what I was seeing in the UK was these pockets of different cultures just concentrating in one place and somehow disconnecting themselves from the local ethos and ideas and worldviews that there was a promise that they might assimilate to. And that I didn't see happening. What I was seeing was the Western world adopting these ideas without question and then turning into them. So this is exactly what I always say, when we talk about building bridges, the most important question we should be asking is that based on cultural history and experiences, who is the one crossing the bridge? And my understanding in the Western context had been, it is always people who adopt the idea of relativism and multiculturalism and the idea of all cultures being equal and all worldviews leading to the same end are the ones who usually cross to the other side and turn into them. So that was, yeah. So I had a great impression of or understanding of how cultures, when they collide, what happens in the UK before landing here in America.
Yeah, so I want to get a couple of specifics really quick, and then we'll get into the detail. So, for example, here's an example. There's a lot of discussion today about the H-1B visa program and how we're importing quite a number of people into the tech industry. Obviously, AI is exploding. We have a ton of folks who we need new coders, people, and we're pulling a lot of individuals from India who have at least some of that background. They're trained there and those kinds of things. But and you and I have talked about this before. Once they get into a Google, once they get into a large tech company. And you have Indian-born managers, you have Indian-born workers, you have Indian-born maybe contract coders. Ideas like the caste system actually start to factor in because that's just natural to the Indian worldview. That and for those who don't know, that there's this idea that there are certain levels of society to which each segment is placed. First started, you can see it in Aristotle or Plato, where you have the philosopher kings, and then the military, and then the working class, the shop owners, and then the servants, right? These are the different kind of caste ideas that the Greeks talk about. But in India, there's a similar strata of individuals.
Yeah.
And as you said, when somebody's up for a promotion, an American born and bred manager will look, well, let's see the work that he does, who's doing the best work for the job. But an Indian one may not do that. He may take caste over quality. And so explain that for me.
So there are a few factors to that. One is that we need to understand that when we hire people, people have different understanding of work ethics. We have to accept the fact that people in their context develop their understanding of work on the basis of the worldview that informs their being as they interact with people in that space of work. So when you're in the Western context, it is completely different. So let me come to this, and I'll get into some details here, is that the whole idea of service, the whole idea of creativity and innovation, why do we see so much of here in the Western world? And why does it take for Christians to actually get into the service area in particular, especially in hospitals and when there's tragedy, Christians are the ones who are in the forefront.
Right.
Education, all these things are taken care by Christians around the world. This is because we have to understand that there are different ethical framework and foundations laid among people when they engage in work. The idea of work in the Indian context, if it is oriented towards eternal consequences, then it is called devotion. But that devotion is not called upon for all people. There are different devotions or yogas. There is dharma yoga, there is karma yoga, there is jnana yoga. So these are like, dharma is one's duty, karma is work. So only those who are assigned to do work as their caste, priority, are supposed to do work, and not for their own good or good of the society. It's because if they do not do it, they have eternal consequences.
It's just the proper order of the universe.
Yes, exactly.
And there's karma that's involved in all of that.
I can give an example. In India, why do you think there is so much of issue with people throwing trash everywhere? Because it is not everyone's duty to pick up the trash. It is only a certain caste who is supposed to do that. And that caste is now educated thanks to missionaries and Christians. They don't want to do that either. So when we talk about caste system, so there are different work ethics. And when we bring in people here, we can't assume that they would just leave that with them when they come here. So you talked about caste system, and I can tell you this as part of my own dissertation. I've been reaching out to a lot of Hindus of all castes and talking to them. And you're right; these are some of the examples they shared, which goes completely against the idea that we all have same intrinsic dignity that needs to be maintained. At the same time, we value people in terms of when it comes to work, in terms of their productivity, in terms of their merit. Which is not the case. Caste and certain other possessions take over preference when it comes to these matters among Indians. This is why you have to see that when we talk about work, especially in the Western context, there have been so much emphasis on innovation, and this is true. If you look at the history of innovations, there is no other nations in other hemisphere who have done so much of innovation like the West has. But the rest of the world does copy it. But now we have reached a place where we are not doing a lot of innovation right now in the West as well as in the East. So we are in that maintenance phase. And let me tell you this, character is tested particularly in the maintenance phase. Innovation
Yeah.
is not, innovation involves people, and you make people do work and they come up with innovation. But when you have to maintain that innovation through the means of communication, through the means of conflict, sometimes character is what forms people together, binds people together. And when that happens, we see clash between people. And that's what we are seeing here in the West right now. So if you're seeing the clash between people questioning H-1B visas and everything, they were all brought in here for innovation, to help the economy, to develop things. And now we are reaching a phase of maintenance. People are reacting differently, even people in the Eastern world. So we need to understand this one thing. And this is the groundwork, not just in the sphere of work, but also in the sphere of our public behavior as well. We are not so our culture is not competing between a moral and an immoral society. What I would say is that they're competing between moral and a amoral society. So the idea is that from an Eastern perspective, and not just Indian perspective, I'm talking in general, in their mind, truth is that which you can get away with. So,
Interesting.
so there is, because you have good gods and evil gods, and you have to appease both, and whatever works for you is true and right. They try to create an amoral society where you lean on each side based on your preferences, based on your situation. So that's where we have come to, and we are to be blamed here in the West as well, because we have so much emphasized this idea of pluralism and relativism without questioning that worldviews and religions could be at different level when it comes to matters of morality and ethics. And that's exactly where the tension is. And now people who have been catechized in a predominantly Christian worldview here in the West, and they have a high trust society, at least they used to, which has completely shifted now, which was built on innocence and guilt culture that appealed to the rule of law, because you have to appeal to a certain standard to pronounce someone innocent or guilty. Now we have moved on to this culture of honor and shame,
Right.
where what matters is that we don't discover truth anymore. We have to create one based on our certain preferences and what
Yes.
benefits us.
So just just backing up for a second, the idea of an honor shame society. I've always felt that honor shame tends to be the default for humanity. That's the Japanese, that's the Muslim societies. That was Rome, that was Greece, right? If you remember Sparta, the famous phrase, "Come back either with your shield or upon it." You know,
Yeah.
you have the honor of winning or have the honor of dying in battle, and those are the only two things that you. If you're a child and you're born with a club foot, well, you're not going to serve the culture, so we discard you, we throw you off the cliff.
Yeah.
If you're a Japanese and you have brought shame and embarrassment onto the organization, then there is a penance for that. And the movie cliche of cutting off of a finger or something like that, or a Muslim daughter who may have been raped, no fault of her own, but she brings shame onto the family, and therefore the family disowns her. So that's an honor shame society. It has nothing to do with whether the things that you did were right or wrong, or whether they were an innocent mistake or things like that. It's just what happens, and maybe think of it this way. We see a lot of that with the social justice warriors who said, well, 20 years ago you put this on your social media post, therefore I can never be friends with you again. That's a Western interpretation of kind of an honor shame ideology.
If you allow me, I'll add another layer to it that will complement what you're saying here, is that so when we talk about innocence and guilt culture, there's something that comes before that, something precedes that. And so does with honor and shame culture. So what precedes innocence and guilt culture, which is the Western framework, is the idea of dignity culture that the Christianity has offered, that we all are created equal, endowed with inalienable rights, right? The idea that we have a God who is not a deist God. If he was deistic God, he cannot endow any rights on us.
Yeah.
A very personal God who created and has created everyone equal. So there's a dignity culture that precedes an innocence and guilt culture. Whereas with honor and shame culture, there's a power culture that has to precede it. So it comes to the matter of how much power you have. Based on that, we're going to give you certain honor and respect. If you don't have any power, then you are shamed in society.
Right.
So that's the tension there, and I think it's dangerous to actually go the latter way, because what happens is that you divide every individual. So even in India, within the caste system, for example, which comes up quite often, it's not that the people who are underprivileged or lower caste, that they are completely innocent. They are not. Even among them, they have created thousands of other caste levels. Because when they acquire certain power, they want to impose that power over someone. So they look for someone below them to do that. So you're creating a society where no one trusts anyone. No one has intrinsic dignity that you should, respect them for. Everyone is at different level. This is why within the Eastern world, if you see, and I can give you an example from the world that I come from, if you ever meet an Indian, they would always, call you sir or madam. It is not because it's out of respect. It's basically a recognition of the fact that they see you as being a little higher in some possession of dignity than them. The time that they realize that they have an upper hand, that sir would go away or madam would go away. That happens time and again. But whereas what happens when they land here and they are offering this respect and dignity, people here in the Western world think that, oh, look at them, what decent people they are. And by the way, I'm not saying that Indians aren't decent. I'm an Indian. There's very sensible people there as well. But I'm talking in terms of cultural mindset of people. That dictates how they conduct their public behavior, and especially at the workplace.
Okay. Well, let's get into some of these specifics, because I think they're important. And I again, so we're kind of future casting. And what you're claiming here is, if the culture that we had, we continue to abandon, because we are abandoning. We are living in a post-Christian world. We're abandoning some of these ideas, like the fact that all people bear the imago Dei, the image of God. That's the thing that makes each of us intrinsically valuable, whether even you're conscious or not. You're intrinsically valuable. We're seeing this radically in places like Canada, with the medical aid in assistance in dying. We see that in other places. Of course, abortion is a question that is talked about as well. But when we start losing that kind of ideology, then things follow from it, as well as the influx of immigration and this pluralism that you're talking about. So first of all, family life. I have like 5 items here. You say there will be a majority of houses and buildings that will have fencing, where that didn't used to be the case. And there will be an increase in block buildings rather than single homes. So you say there's going to be surveillance cameras in almost all public places, and the major changes in retail for return and exchange policies that will have to be adopted. And then lastly, crumbling public infrastructure, right? Buses, public spaces, and lastly, which I thought was interesting, an increase in thrifting. So let's go through this. So let's first talk about houses and buildings and safety. It seems like all of these, your family life is going to change because you're going to be less safe. You're going to feel less trustful of others.
So before we get into them individually, let me set the stage for you. The reason for that is because you have to understand that the Christian framework also created an abundance psychology, that we are creative like God is creative. We multiply, we innovate, we have work ethics that we respect. Work is good. Work was instituted before the fall. Work is not the outcome of sin that you should avoid completely. So we had that kind of mindset and framework, the framework of abundance.
Discovering God's thoughts after him.
Exactly.
Right? It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of man to find that matter out, where you're sent to investigate. Yeah.
but that is now being abandoned for scarcity thinking. So when you have a low trust society, you always work. So when you don't have God of the Bible, what you have is that you have to lift yourself with your own bootstrap. So it's about you competing, you fighting, and you're wanting to actually grab and possess as much as possible for your own self and for your family and for your own people.
Regardless of anyone else.
Regardless. So that's where the whole idea of envy comes in, at small scale as well as at the larger scale. So the idea of someone being a billionaire could be offensive to someone, because why does that person need to have so much money?
Yeah.
They may not look at the other side of it as to how much they're contributing to the society by creating jobs and other things, because that's not the priority. Work is not, right? So it's about the possession. So that's the underlying, reason why we are seeing this shift, or I'm proposing that these shifts might happen faster. And also remember, when it comes to the Western idea, which was, and still people are asking this, is because, is the American culture still the idea of melting pot? It is not. It's more like a salad bar for a Western context. I give the example of thali. If you ever been to an Indian restaurant, they give you a big plate with separate plates on it with different dishes. None of them mix. And that's where we have come to. So earlier, when you had immigrants coming from Italy or France or Germany, even though you spoke different languages and there were differences and they created their own enclaves, eventually they assimilated. Why? It was not because of language, it was not because of color, it was not because of any other reason, but the framework that they had, which was Christian, the moral framework. And that was the basic thing when it comes to cohesion in society. Coming to our time now, we have people coming from around the world, bringing their worldviews and their perspective about morality, and they're creating their own enclaves. So there is no language similarity, there is no understanding of moral framework that would unite people anymore. That's why I'm seeing there's a distrust being created. There are incidences of clash happening because of lack of understanding about each other. And people may say that you can create that understanding through various means, but it's not an easy task. It doesn't happen in a decade or two. It takes centuries for that understanding to happen. So when I'm saying that when people have different ideas of what belongs to them and what belongs to their neighbor, and private property rights, what does it mean to enter into someone's boundary, and ideas like that. So I think I'm going to see this is exactly how the rest of the world works, be it Africa or Eastern world, where people have to fight for their private,
they have to self-guard.
Yes, exactly.
And you have to become initially distrustful of others.
Distrustful. So you have to create fences. You have to barricade your location, and that's what I'm seeing going to happen here more and more as time goes.
And so in public centers, because they are owned by quote unquote all of us, then we can do whatever we want with them.
Yeah.
We can destroy them if we're so desired. So and the increase in thrifting, is that simply because that's the only way that you can afford some of these things? Why did you offer that one?
And so exactly the whole idea of there are a couple. I also mentioned about people returning things, right?
Right.
The whole idea of people bringing back, once they have used something, back to
war at once and then take it back so they get their money back. Yeah.
Yes. So there are a couple of things. One is that culturally people are conditioned to, because we live in that Instagram and TikTok kind of culture, where people are not able to possess it. Either they can complain about it or they can look like them. And one of the best ways to do that is through the means of thrifting.
Okay.
So a lot of people are creating a persona of their lifestyle based on, not because they can afford it, but because, so it's not a matter of whether it's the right thing to do or not a right thing to do. But people are also, because they are working that mindset of scarcity, that there isn't enough.
Yeah, social media then gives you a desire to emulate those who maybe you see as above you. And once you can emulate that, then you feel that you've achieved that. So, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. All right, so let's take the next block. Issues of education and development. And you note three main issues. First of all, a major push against homeschooling. And this seems kind of interesting. I think we need to do a whole
series on that.
Yeah, on homeschooling. But why do you think that the change in perception here is going to immediately create a counter movement against the homeschooling?
I think the very idea of homeschooling was one which is built on the premise that the parents have a responsibility towards the education of their children. Mm-hmm. That's the basic premise. The other is that it's not purely a reaction against public school. It's a reaction against what is going on in public school. So that's the distinction that needs to be maintained.
So you're saying the public school is going to adopt more of this multiculturalism, more of this kind of overarching neutrality. You can't call anybody bad. You can't call anybody, any culture wrong in any facet. And therefore, anyone who's homeschooling, we have to go and fix them. We have to short circuit that because they're being quote unquote indoctrinated.
And we are seeing that since COVID. We have seen the rise of homeschooling system. But in so doing, what happens is that when you have an established state that had an oversight on institutions of education, we are seeing this in Europe. For example, Germany, for that reason, doesn't allow homeschooling. Is for that reason that the state must have control in terms of their formation and education. Whereas here we are seeing a reaction to that because the state is adopting more of, if I may put it, that going the other way. The Eastern way, and in terms of the understanding of our social sphere and how we interact with each other and everything, and also the workforce. The state is recognizing also that state plays a major role in that because the world is changing with AI and everything. Right. It's not the same kind of workforce we need anymore. So there's that tension there with the homeschooling system as well and educational system, higher education as well. There is no clear indication as to what is that going to lead us to? What kind of work are our kids going to do with a degree in humanities or any other? So there is that question. So people are going to move more towards homeschooling. And when that happens, obviously, it is evident in the Western world. It is the Christians mostly who tend to homeschool their children. So there's certain kind of wave of understanding that's going to prevail among a certain group of people who are being educated in homeschool. And there is going to be definitely more clash. And when that happens, there will be attempts to somehow not promote or bring in stipulations and control.
Regulations.
We are seeing already happening. I think it was in Kentucky, where they came up with this idea of parents having to prove their innocence before they're being allowed to homeschool their kids. Yeah. Which is completely against the American idea or the Western or the Christian idea of innocent until proven guilty.
Interesting. And what you say is, of course, now downstream for that, once public education becomes more rigid, becomes more dictatorial, becomes more basically position-oriented, then you see a couple of outcroppings from that. One is an increase in brain drain and skill drain, as well as a steady decrease in technological innovations. So it becomes conformity, right? And conformity does two things. The people who, the Elon Musks of the world, and it was fascinating. I heard an interview that Elon Musk was doing, and somebody was talking about, how can you have these billions and blah, blah, blah. He goes, look, I'm building stuff. And people forget Elon Musk went bankrupt many times. He was one of the co-founders of PayPal, and it took them, I think, 5 times before PayPal actually worked. So he failed quite a bit, and he took a risk with his money. But once he established that, he didn't sit on his laurels and say, "Okay, I made my millions. I'm going to cash in." He said, "No, I want to do more." Tesla, SpaceX. now AI, and all of these other issues, the Boring Company. And in all of that, he builds stuff. There was an analyst who said, in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, we were a nation of builders. The people who were at the top echelon of economic society, the Rockefellers, the J. Paul Gettys, they were the ones who built things. They built railroads. They built oil pipelines. They were innovators in that. Now, I'm not saying that those people were perfect. I'm not saying that everything they did was above board, or that they weren't, kind of merciless in their business practices. That's true as well in certain cases. But they built things, and that's how they gathered their money. In the last 50 years, most wealth has not been done, and especially in the last 20, it's been gathered not through building stuff, but through trading, Wall Street trading, through short sales, through day trading, through all of these different kind of financial dynamics that at the end of the day, you don't have anything better. It doesn't empower human life.
Yeah.
And this is what Musk is saying. He said, yeah, you guys make your money that way, but it's just money. It's not doing anything. What I'm doing is, I'm digging tunnels so that people can get to work faster, and I'm doing it at an eighth of the cost of what it used to be. And we're going to the moon. Heck, your Tesla car is improving the environment. I'm building stuff. And once you say there's no actual reward for that, you can't make too much money, then either the people will leave or they won't bother to study, because what's the point?
Yeah. The only difference there is that with Elon Musk having been raised in the Western context and having his business here, works on a framework where he is thinking still, in some sense, with the service mind in terms of what it's going to do to the humanity. Whereas when it comes to the other context or other worldviews, it is not primarily for the people per se. It is very much self-oriented. Success is inward and directed to one's own self and one's own community or caste or people. So while Elon Musk is doing these developments and is outward focused, how does it impact the world? In the Eastern world, mostly, that's why you can talk about in the Eastern world about families controlling businesses. It never goes out of the family. And they are billionaires and multi-billionaires. So, and the difference is here, I would say, which is what especially people here need to focus on and should find some encouragement. And I would say this is much of the innovation still happens in the Western world. There's a reason for it, and we kind of touched on that. Rest of the world either improves on those innovations or they become even worse on those innovations. But it happens only through the means of copying what the West does. Now, given that we have slowed down innovation, that's what's happening right now. That is where I was saying that we may have some brain drain when we are not needing people from outside anymore. A lot of people wanting to actually leave America and going back to their country because of immigration policies and things like that. There will be people leaving the country, but they will not be going back to their own country, by the way. So one of the trends that you will see is that people who are leaving America, they're not going back to India, China, or any other nation. They're going back to European nations. And those nations are inviting them in because they need what America has.
Okay. Interesting. And again, the more the heavy thinkers leave, the less we can innovate. Plus, not to mention the fact that, I make this point in other talks, that as our fertility rates drop, there's simply fewer people. And if there are fewer people, right, so this is one of the hidden dangers of the fertility drop. Say you have a problem like cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer. They've got a new development now for pancreatic cancer. Mm-hmm. The way you make progress on that is you have a bunch of people working on the problem. You just if there are more scientists studying pancreatic cancer and how to treat it, then you get developments happening more quickly. It's just more minds make a better approach to this, because people can see things others don't, etc. When you drop fertility, you have fewer scientists writ whole. And when you have fewer scientists writ whole, that means you have fewer scientists working on any of these problems. You have fewer technologists working on AI issues. You have fewer general doctors even able to visit patients. And so one of the big fertility drop concerns is innovation will simply go down because there are just fewer people working on these problems. And people don't even think about this. But, you know, you gotta, if our entire population starts to age and we have fewer doctors to see those aging people right when their ailments come up, it's going to be a mess. So, but this is another aspect in technological innovations. We've always assumed that it's an upward curve, right? And that's not true. I mean, I remember you talk about, I think it was George Orwell was putting his book in 1984, you know, because
by the way, he grew up in India.
Oh, nice. So I mean, you know, you had the Wright brothers flying the first plane in 1910, and just 50 years later, we're landing on the moon, 1969, 59 years later. So, but it's been 60 years since then, and it didn't naturally continue that upward curve. We don't have our own George Jetson mobiles.
Yeah.
You know, those don't exist. So anyway, it's not consistent. Okay. Let's move on to politics and immigration, because this is really a big part of what you're saying. And we've got several points here. You say, no, number one, you will see an increase in Asians, people with this mindset, running for public office. And more people will attempt to at least learn how to speak Hindi. And social media influencers will focus on demands of the Indian audience. And that is very financially driven, money, right? So let's start with those, and we'll go into politics more beyond that. But you're going to see more Indians running for office. Well, Vingwei did.
We have a lot in, already running. Yeah, so even just do a Google search on the amount of Asians and Indians running in Texas, for example, where we have the largest concentration of people from that community. Now, this is my speculation and something that I think through when it comes to the outworking of ideas. And we touched on this because the primary framework that allows for honor and shame culture to sustain and remain is the power culture. So it comes down to the idea of how much of that you control. And politics is one of the ways in which that is done in the easiest way, if I may put it that way. Because creating the whole landscape of culture is not an easy task. So from an Eastern perspective, it works when you're looking top down. So to do that, you may have to position yourself in places of power. And politics is one of those places. So a lot of Hindus, particularly, if I may say, or Easterners who run for office are not necessarily running because they hold to the fundamental ideas of this republic. I'm not questioning all of them. They may have good reasons for it, but there is a mindset and framework that brings them to that power because of the demographic among which they live, which is, again, when they come to that place of power, then they're able to establish and move things in favor for a particular culture of people.
And you think here that being able to speak Hindi will be a benefit in that regard?
It is already happening. So maybe not much in America. There are places, I think it's in France and in Australia, if I'm not wrong. France for sure, where universities are now taking up Hindi as one of the languages to be taught. In for example, in Alberta, is it, I guess, where they have Punjabi. They're teaching Punjabi in university now.
Wow.
So it's already happening. But I'm not much concerned about that. But when it comes to social media and influences, it's basically, let me say this. We have 1.4 billion people in India itself, for example. So even now, if you search for any influencer, including movie artists like Rihanna and all, or singers, they all travel to, or at least make one travel to India or connect
Yeah.
with some billionaire there and do some shows. Or they want to do that because they recognize that 1.4 billion people, of most of them who have access to internet, that's where the subscriber base is. Even for Christian influencers, that's the fact. So
Yeah.
if you see, if you do any video or talk on anything to do with India, you would get more hits on your video than any other. There's a reason for that. So I definitely see a lot of influencers for that reason. That's why I said money, money, money. For financial reasons, they would be reaching out.
They're-
It's already
they're-
happening.
Yeah, they're looking for that large audience that's been
Yes.
more or less untapped. And again, the idea that you're just Western is attractive in and of itself.
Yes.
Because they see them as higher. So one point that you put here is changes in the way jury duty works. And I want you to explain this because I think this is fascinating. So
Yeah.
how the jury system, we take it for granted. And this is, of course, a big concern because anyone who is accused of a crime that has to appear before a jury is going to assume that the jury system works in a specific way, and that may not be the case if there's a significant number of foreign-born individuals on the jury. So go ahead and let me.
My experience is this, and I'll give a specific example as well, but speaking to a lot of people who come from outside America, where this is not a practice, jury duty is not specifically a practice in all nations. It's a privilege here citizens have. For an Easterner, it makes no sense at all. How could you participate at such a level? Because there are certain expectations necessary to be met. This lady who used to cut my hair from Vietnam. I was talking to her and mentioning to her about different things, and she brought up this complaint that she's a citizen and she got a letter from the court saying that she needs to appear for jury duty, and she said, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have absolutely no understanding why they forced me to do this. It's also because the framework they're coming from. It is not we the people who actually have the power to participate in such a role. That's a very it's an outcome of Reformation, if I may put it, the priesthood of all believers, right? That we can participate in that act of being priestly.
Very much, yeah.
In the act of justice, which is not there in culture. So that's why I was saying that a lot of people who come from there have no clue why this exists and what a privilege this is to actually participate in as a citizen. So it may not be a drastic change. What I'm seeing is that because when people come in here, and if this trend is going to continue the way it is or it was, things would change. When they are in one location, if you have a group of people who looks the same, speak the same, and have the worldview that is similar, but not similar to the idea that you can participate in this level, they would behave differently, and courts will have to make their own decision and preferences based on that. So there might be changes there that we might see.
Well, you talk about other changes. You say the political rhetoric will change. It'll move definitely from nationalism to a more broad globalism, civilization. And you say the northern border will become a new focus in political discussions. We always think Mexico is the big problem with immigration issues, but you're talking about Canada. So why don't you unpack those real quick?
And the reason for that is because we have always we've not been as stringent when it comes to regulations and restrictions around northern borders as we've been, especially even in our discussion. Whenever there's a discussion on borders, it's always a southern border. And I understand the access point there, and people from around the world, they have easier access through southern borders than the northern. However, because Canada has opened its border to the world, and people, especially of different worldviews, especially Islamists, people, Muslims who have come into Canada, I can see that very soon because of that. Ideologically, I would say West has become Hindu, but existentially, there is a threat. If that may be there, it might be through the radical Islamist, and an easy access point for them to enter into United States would be northern borders, not the southern.
Yeah, not as everybody knows that. First of all, the primary push to get into the country comes from the Central and South American residents.
And even we need to understand that when southern, people move from southern nations into America, most of them are Catholics.
Yeah. Yes.
That's not the case
with the north.
From northern borders.
Because
no Christian really Canadian is wanting to actually enter into America illegally.
Yeah, that's a good. Although they keep burning churches up there, I'm not sure what's going to happen there. But that's kind of proves the point, is that as more Islamists come into Canada and more Christian churches get set on fire, you start to ask some questions. And that brings us to your last major category, issues of religion and faith. This is, I think, where you spent the most time, but a lot of them have similar ideas underneath them. One of the more concerning is the ideas of restrictions. So you say specifically churches and other religious places will have designated areas, and distribution of Bibles and other religious tracts will be regulated. Now, we have a very strong history of the First Amendment, and government can't thwart the free practice of religion in those cases. But still, you're saying that that's going to change in some instance. So why don't you talk about those first?
It might be a slow change, but let me give an example. It's the initiation of that dialogue. It's already happening. See what's happening in Texas, for example, this place that is designated only for Muslims to build in terms of community.
Yeah, I saw that. The
governor is fighting against. So that's
it's like a local ordinance. So the Muslims moved into the local political power structure, right? With city council, things of that nature, and then they passed an ordinance to make this a Muslim-only enclave.
Mm-hmm. So even though there is a resistance against that right now, what if another state they give that mandate or allowance for such a thing? So once it happens for Hindus, once it happens for Muslims, it's not gonna happen because of Christians, because we are very particular in terms of where the worship happens and where people gather and the laws of the land and things like that. But once the allowance start happening and there is no more resistance, I think eventually it's going to trickle down to Christians as well, saying that these are the designated places where you can
for
build
you, since we do it for everybody else. Interestingly, there's another option here that may not be how people legislate exclusive enclaves, but just through the allowance of the practice of faith, those exclusive enclaves develop. For example, the call to prayer, the Islamic call to prayer on loudspeakers. In the UK, this is huge. That the Anglicans are moving out in droves because they can't take the loudspeaker calls to prayer at 5 times a day, and then you'll get patrons going to food stores. You note this as well, for asking for either Brahmic or Halal only foods.
And this is the reason for that, because if you talk to a Hindu or a Muslim, they don't live in that bifurcated world of sacred and secular. For them, eating food is as sacred and secular as possible. It's cultural.
So, well, like you made the point, work, right? Work is part of your karmic approach, and if you do work beneath you,
culture is religion for them.
Yeah,
and they have no objection to what Van Til said. Culture is religion externalized. A Hindu understands that. A Muslim understands that. But when it comes to people here, the problem is that we designate, eating halal or eating these and going on a procession on the road, taking your idols out and all those, part of the culture. That's their culture. They don't go deep into it in terms of what ideas, religious and worldview ideas, that undergird these public demonstrations and expressions. So call to prayer, for example, it's not a cultural matter. It's not only a religious, call to prayer like the bell at a church,
right,
or a cathedral, right? It's not that. There is a philosophy and a worldview and a theology and a doctrine that's behind it. So from a Muslim's perspective, or even from a Hindu's perspective, when you land at a place and establish a place of worship, that is not for temporary purpose, that's eternal. It's a claim to the land and the region around it. The call to prayer is to call people, Muslims who live around. Remember, this we're talking about 6th century, 7th century, 8th century world, where Muslims would live around mosque. It is to call them. So in one sense, it's an expression of the fact that we believe that we have landed here. And like Buddhists, for example, they try to buy houses, $1 million houses near their temple.
Yeah.
They are driven towards or drawn towards their temple. Same with Hinduism. Hindus, when they establish a temple, they establish their gods on the land itself. There's a claim to the land itself. It's not merely that you can move that church from one place to another whenever you want to, if you want to, at your convenience. That's not how a Muslim or a Hindu thinks. So to equate call to prayer with, bells on the cathedrals is a misunderstanding of what they both are.
It's not merely a claim to dominance in that area, but it's also a claim, an attempt to say you should be Muslim too. Islam overrides anything else, and that's part and parcel of the Islamic understanding of how it works. This is why Jerusalem is such a hot spot. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, one you see on the Temple Square, on the Temple Mount. It's because in an Islamic mind, once Allah is great, and once He conquers a land, they stay conquered. And the fact that...
Or it must be reconquered if it is taken back.
Right. And so this is the problem with Israel, is wait a minute, they took it back. We, in the Crusades, we won, but they took it back. Now what do we do? And they'll always try to reconquer it.
And this is where people need to understand, and it is a good idea, and it's from a Christian perspective. So the whole idea of religious pluralism and allowance for worship, it's purely, if I may say, a Christian gift to the world, that we respect that we don't force religion on anyone or God on anyone. You come to the Lord as He leads you and draws you to Himself. It's a personal decision of individuals. When we talk about religious pluralism, we never conflate it with or confuse it with relativism, that all religions are the same.
Right.
But when a Hindu or a Muslim takes advantage of this idea, in their mind they're thinking that we are as good as Christians. So we must have the same rights and the same privileges and same way of doing things as they do, which would mean that you beat your chest on the street, which would mean that you would just, be out there and doing things that are usually not part of the culture here, not part of, public sphere in which people live together.
Right. So you're saying how that will play itself out. One of your points is installation of Hindu idols in malls, religious processions in public, things like that. Now we obviously,
these are already happening. Yeah,
we do see that. I mean, obviously, many Vietnamese nail shops or Chinese restaurants will have a Buddha in front of the shop. You kind of understand that, but in public malls, in public places, that's interesting. Of course. We see that push, again, going back to schools. I remember we homeschooled all 4 of our boys, but there was one year they were getting a little bit restless, and I want to go to public school. They see all the kids walking by the street, laughing and talking with each other, and they think school must be fun, and I'm missing out. And we told them, well, if you go, you're sticking it out for the whole semester. We're not throwing you in for 2 weeks and pulling you back out. You're going to have to experience it. And it only lasted 1 semester. But during that time, we had one child in kindergarten, and they decided to celebrate the Dawi, the light festival.
Diwali.
The Festival of Lights, and they had him draw everybody was drawing pictures, and he drew a cross. He drew, and she wouldn't put his picture up on the board. She would.
Wow.
So first of all, it's like, wait a minute. First of all, you're teaching these kids about an Indian, a religious festival, and at the same time, if he draws something Christian, you're censoring it. It was an issue, but that's what we're going to see. And you say that one of the things that this sensitivity will lead to is a push for anti-conversion bills. And we see that in Israel, we see that in India and other places, that it is illegal. And Muslim countries have run amok with this, really put people in jail, taken their lives, because just simply of the charge of trying to convert someone from Islam to, say, Christianity.
Yeah.
And you think that'll happen here?
So we are already seeing this kind of happening in the UK, for example.
And Canada as well.
And Canada as well. That's already started happening. Because it starts by questioning the scripture itself and finding it offensive. Preaching on the public places. So this is how it happened in India too. People were preaching in streets and they were restricted, and Bible distribution were restricted. And then it landed at the end to a place where I think 9 or 10 states in India now have anti-conversion bill that you can't convert anyone to any other religion, or particularly Christianity. If you do so, you may have to go to the court and prove that why you're doing it. There has to be, a personal, genuine reason to do that, and people don't do that anymore. So I'm already seeing that happening in the UK. People are not allowed to quote certain scriptures in the Bible, but which they used to. It's not something new for them. It's already being banned. People are being arrested for it, fined for it.
Even on social media, even by posting it, not even doing it out, say, just posting it on their social media channels. Yeah, it's stunning.
So I can definitely see this is progression towards some kind of serious restriction in terms of what does it entail when it comes to evangelism for Christians. It will
go ahead, I'm sorry.
It'll be confined either in, like, for example, in the UK, we always brag about this Hyde Park where you can go and debate about, but remember, it's a designated place that someone has allowed you to do it.
Speaker's Corner.
Speaker's Corner, right? It's a great privilege, but it is a designated place.
Only there.
Only there, nowhere else. So instead of, do we want that everywhere? And that's exactly what, no, we want to preach everywhere, wherever people are. Wherever there's a need for salvation.
And we saw this in the anti-abortion issue as well, when there were all these restrictions in front of clinics and things of that nature.
Yeah, and in India as well, they have come up with this new ruling in one of the states that you cannot have possession of scripture of any other religion within 25 miles.
Wow.
And guess what? Every mile has maybe 4 temples.
Wow.
Which means you cannot have Bible anywhere.
Anywhere. Yeah.
Anywhere. So you come up with a rule like that, then I don't know. And people may think that, that wouldn't happen here in America. We said about a lot of things like that. That wouldn't happen here in America. So it's not merely what the Constitution allows and permits, but also what people get away with. That matters.
How they interpret it. They can interpret it as they will. Obviously, we noted, banking issues, right? That because there is a specific structure for how you lend money. There's a Sharia law that.
If you're going to bring in more Muslims, they would need Sharia compliant banks.
Right.
So people usually ask me, do you think there is Sharia in America? I don't talk about Dearborn. I don't talk about any other place. I say, do you have Islamic banking in America? The time you invited them over to start a bank, you were saying that we are fine with Sharia because their banks have to be Sharia compliant.
Right. And lastly, I think this is interesting. You say there will be leniency towards the adherence of a caste system because people will no longer understand the caste structure as inherently religious, which it is. It's downstream from the concept of karma and reincarnation. you're born into a caste because your karmic debt is such that it places you in, or you're born as a dung beetle or what, funny in the West, whenever anybody searches for their past lives, they're always usually what I call famous adjacent, right? Oh, I was the stepmaid to Queen Mary or something like that. They're never like, oh, I was, a fly that was born on the excrement of, they never talk about that, but in true reincarnation, there's a much broader swath.
It's already happening. Here in California, they were introducing a bill that would actually restrict people from asking caste. So there's been a huge fight against that on the premise that it's not a religious matter again. It's a cultural thing.
It's a cultural. Now, first of all, is that at all fair? I know in Muslim societies, really all you need to do is know someone's last name. So the name kind of broadcasts what caste in which you fall.
So in India, if you mention only your first name, the second question is expected. They would ask you, what's your full name? Because once you mention your last name, you know where you come from, not just the caste, but also location, and also relations, and also most of the time, your profession.
Yeah, because they're all linked. Yeah. So that's interesting. Okay, so wrapping it all up, Jacob, what do you see? First of all, so that's kind of the picture of what could happen 10 years from now. What do we as the church do about it? How do we either help bring back some of the Christian ethos that we've lost? How do we make sure that the things that are truly valuable in our culture stay in our culture?
Yeah. I would say we need to recapture the unifying moral center of this nation and also civilization. We have to see things from a grander scale. And it's a cliche, right? Gospel is the answer. It is the answer. But the gospel, not merely of the proclamation, what Christ did on the cross, but what happened because of it. How has the gospel impacted all spheres of our existence?
Yeah.
We cannot offer a deficient message of the gospel and expect the fruits. We have to reclaim and amplify. That's one thing I always say. We don't need to just analyze and advocate and actualize, but we also need to amplify what Christianity has done. And I'm very optimistic. One of the things I also mentioned, one of the predictions I made was a lot of Muslims becoming Christians.
Yes. I didn't talk about that.
It was not all negative. I think, and it's already happening, Lenny. Every day, almost every day, I'm hearing how Muslims are coming to know the Lord because of the exposure, because of the gospel truth being proclaimed through the means of internet. People who have taken, high risk to the point of, even losing their life and wanting to speak the truth. And that is bearing much fruit now.
Yeah.
I'll see more and more Muslims coming to faith, but not because of this. I used to think this, Lenny, and I have corrected myself. I used to think that, and I've made this argument before, we were finding it difficult to get into Muslim countries and Hindu nations. God is bringing them to our borders. Now we're going to win them. I used to think that. Oh, what a mistake that was. I realized over these years, we had no clue where they're coming from and what they believed. And we thought we could give them the gospel and they'll understand it.
Yeah.
No. We are the ones who've been crossing the bridge, as I said before.
And a point here that I really want to emphasize, and it's far too misunderstood within modern evangelicalism, is the Great Commission in Matthew 28 is not to go out and sell fire insurance. It's not, you need to be saved so you don't go to hell. The Great Commission is go and make disciples of all nations. That's not merely a change of state between your soul who was lost and burdened and enslaved to sin to now being freed from that and a child of God, although it includes that. But that's the starting point. To be a disciple means to live that out, not merely personally, but publicly and in the institutions that you run or work for, or those things with whom you can influence others. All of that, if you continue to be a disciple, right? Disciple has the concept of discipline. And just as a professional athlete has to discipline himself to get better and better so he can perform when it's necessary, so the Christian has to discipline himself in all aspects of his life to get better and better so he can perform when it's necessary in the clutch. And it will then, at that point, allow you to profit spiritually from that. That's where the kingdom building comes in.
Let me say this, and we need to work with this kind of understanding that there's only one Father of all nations, God the Father. And there's only one inheritor of nations, God the Son, Jesus Christ. Everyone in between is either a good steward of that king or an imposter.
Yeah.
We have a choice here.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this time, Jacob. Like I said, we'll have to have you back on. We'll talk a little bit more maybe about homeschooling and the issues that are going along there. Really appreciated the time. Any last closing thoughts before we end?
Yeah, what people have here and what Christ has offered in terms of a nation and civilization, it's beautiful. It's something to be cherished and be proud of. And we got to be generous with what God has given us and proclaim it with full confidence. And I think these changes that I predicted, they may not come about if we decide to, be faithful to what God has called us to.
All right. Well, thank you so much, brother, and I will talk with you soon. Now, Christians should never respond to cultural change with fear, but neither should we ignore the power of worldview to shape civilizations. Laws, institutions, education, innovation, public trust, and even basic human dignity, while they're never morally neutral, they grow out of the deeper beliefs about God, truth, and humanity, as well as our purpose. The real question isn't whether America will change. Every culture changes. The question is, what kind of moral vision will shape that next generation? Now, as followers of Christ, I think our responsibility is not merely to preserve a culture, but to faithfully proclaim truth, to disciple nations, to love our neighbors, and to demonstrate the goodness of the gospel in every sphere of life. If this conversation has challenged you, encouraged you, or maybe even raised questions, leave a comment below. I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you here next week for another Come Let Us Reason. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.